stand on the coast of Ghana, and you can feel history in the air. The salt spray from the Atlantic Ocean hits the ancient stone walls of Elmina Castle. Elmina Castle. Exterior stones worn by sea and time. Inside, dark dungeons. This was not a fortress built to protect a nation from invaders by sea. It was a prison. It was a place where human beings were held, sorted, sold like any other commodity. Millions of African, a human tide forced through these gates. Men, women, children. They were taken from their homes, their families, their cultures. They were marched for miles, often in chains, to these coastal dungeons. Here they waited in darkness, their futures stolen from them before they even set foot on a ship. On Gorée Island off the coast of Senegal stands the House of Slaves. Its famous door of no return opens directly to the sea, a final horrifying portal between a life of freedom and a life of bondage. For those who passed through it, Africa became a memory, a whisper on the wind. The transatlantic slave trade was not a random act of cruelty. It was a calculated economic system born from the ambitions of European empires. The New World was rich in resources, sugar, tobacco, cotton, coffee, but they required a massive labor force to cultivate. Initially, European powers tried indigenous populations indentured servants, but these sources proved insufficient for vast plantations. Africa, with its internal trade networks, was seen as the answer. Various African kingdoms and coastal merchants became involved. They captured people from rival ethnic groups from the interior and traded them for European goods, guns, textiles, alcohol, trinkets. This influx of firearms dramatically altered the balance of power in West and Central Africa. A vicious cycle emerged. Kingdoms needed more guns. The only way to get guns was to capture and sell more people. This tragic partnership fueled the trade for centuries. The journey across the Atlantic, known as the Middle Passage, was the second leg of the triangular trade, and arguably the most horrific chapter of this entire saga. People were packed into the holds of specially designed ships, crammed into spaces so tight they could barely move. Men were often forced to lie shoulder to shoulder on rough wooden shelves, chained at their ankles, chained at their wrists. Women were typically held in separate, crowded quarters. Children were typically held in separate, crowded quarters. The air below deck was thick with the stench of sweat, sickness, death. It was a voyage that could last from 1 to 3 months, a living nightmare from which there was no escape. The conditions were deliberately dehumanizing. Alexander Falconbridge described the deck covered with blood mucus that it resembled a slaughterhouse. Disease ran rampant. Dysentery, smallpox, scurvy swept through the packed holds, killing thousands. Olaudah Equiano was captured as a child and later wrote his autobiography, giving a first-hand account. He wrote of the loathsomeness of the stench, the galling of the chains, the shrieks of the women, the groans of the dying. The narrative of the slave trade is not just one of victimhood, it is also a powerful story of human resistance. From the moment of capture to life on the plantations, enslaved people fought for their freedom in countless ways. This fight began on the very ships that carried them across the ocean. Historians have documented more than 500 revolts aboard slave ships during the Middle Passage. Though most were ultimately unsuccessful due to the crew's superior weaponry, they were acts of incredible bravery. Men and women would break their chains, attack their captors with whatever they could find, try to seize control of the vessel, choosing to fight and die rather than submit to enslavement. One of the most famous shipboard revolts occurred on the Spanish vessel La Amistad in 1839. Led by a Menda man named Sengbe Pie, also known as Joseph Tsinke, a group of captured Africans rose up, killed the captain, and ordered the surviving crew to sail them back to Africa. The ultimate act of resistance, however, unfolded on the island of Saint-Domingue, the most profitable slave colony in the world. In 1791, inspired by the ideals of the French Revolution, the enslaved population rose up in a massive, coordinated rebellion. This was the start of the Haitian Revolution. Led by brilliant military and political figures like Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Henri Christophe, an army of formerly enslaved people fought and defeated the French armies, Spanish armies, British armies. It was a long and bloody struggle, a war for freedom fought on an epic scale. The success of the Haitian Revolution in 1804 sent shockwaves across the globe. It resulted in the creation of Haiti, the world's first independent black republic and the first nation founded by a successful slave revolt. The fight to end the transatlantic slave trade was a long and arduous battle, waged by abolitionists on both sides of the Atlantic. It was a movement powered by formerly enslaved people like Olaudah Equiano, whose powerful autobiography exposed the trade's horrors to a wide audience. It was also driven by white allies like William Wilberforce in Britain, who campaigned tirelessly in Parliament. They used moral persuasion, political lobbying, and grassroots organizing to shift public opinion. They highlighted the profound hypocrisy of nations that claimed to be founded on principles of liberty while profiting from the brutal subjugation of millions. The abolitionist movement was one of history's first great human rights campaigns. Great Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807, and other European nations followed suit, though slavery itself would persist for decades longer. For Europe and America, the wealth generated by slave labor helped fuel the Industrial Revolution, building cities, funding universities, and creating immense fortunes that still exist today. For Africa, the consequences were devastating. The loss of millions of its youngest and strongest people, the constant warfare, and the social disruption left the continent vulnerable and fractured, paving the way for European colonial conquest in the 19th century. Today, the legacy of the slave trade continues to shape our world. It is visible in the systemic racism and economic inequality that persist in the Americas and Europe. This has led to a growing and urgent call for reparations. This is not simply about financial payment. It is a demand for a comprehensive process of restorative justice, a formal acknowledgement of the crime, an investment in the communities still suffering from its after-effects, and a commitment to telling the full, unvarnished truth about this history in our schools and public spaces. As the great writer James Baldwin said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." We must confront the uncomfortable truths of the transatlantic slave trade, not to assign guilt, but to foster understanding and empathy. We must listen to the stories, study the evidence, and acknowledge the deep wounds that have yet to heal. Only by facing this history honestly can we begin to repair its damage and work towards a more just and equitable future for everyone. The echoes of those coastal forts still call to us, urging us to remember, to reflect, and to act.